All right, now up until this point, we've mostly done addition, right? We've talked about the fact that the title of this section is adding and subtracting negative and positive numbers, or adding and subtracting real numbers. Now, I've kind of showed you how subtraction can be written as plus minus, adding a negative number, right? But we really haven't done too much subtraction in this section so far. We've pretty much been adding numbers together. Either we're adding two positive numbers like this and getting a positive number, or we're adding two negative numbers together, always getting a negative number, or we're adding two different sign numbers, and then the sign of the answer is going to depend on the problem. And that's basically what we've done up to this point. Here I want to briefly show you, just digging a little bit deeper into the subtraction side. What you've kind of learned already is that addition and subtraction are basically the same thing. Because when you introduce negative numbers, since negative numbers already have that little negative sign out front, a lot of times you can write it as subtraction. I've kind of tried to demystify that as we go along here. Here we're going to kind of dig into that area just a little bit more to make you even more comfortable with that part of it. So just to kind of start out, we'll start out with a super easy problem, from first grade. Let's say we have 8 minus 4. 8 minus 4. Well, you know what the answer to this is. You know the answer is 4 because you have 8 pencils, you take 4 away, and you get 4. But this is really exactly the same thing as what we've been doing earlier. 8 plus negative 4. Right? It's exactly the same thing because I told you anytime you have plus a negative sign, you can write it as subtraction, right? And I've done that a few times to kind of just point that out to you. And if you use the rules of what we've been doing here, you have different signs you're adding together, positive plus negative. So you ignore and you subtract them. 8 minus 4 is going to give you 4, and the answer takes the sign of the larger number. In this case, it's positive. So you get positive number here and positive 4 here. And that matches because I'm telling you that they're both the same thing. We've done that several times. So you can kind of see how addition of a negative can sort of be turned into subtraction. I'm telling you this so that if you see a problem written like this, you know what to do. And if you see a problem written like this, you know what to do. You can kind of convert back and forth, whatever makes you more comfortable. It's kind of up to you. Now let's, change things up a little bit. What if you have something like negative 8 minus 4. It's the same problem as what we have above, except for the fact that I have a negative 8 subtracting 4, and here I had a positive 8 subtracting 4. Well, if you think about it in terms of your number line, if I start out at negative 8 and I subtract 4 more, then I'm going to be going to the left 4 units. So it would be starting from negative 8, negative 9, negative 10, negative 11, negative 12. And that is the answer. But this can also be rewritten exactly in terms of what we've been doing before as negative 8 plus negative 4. Because anytime you have plus a negative number, it's the same thing as subtraction. And if you use the rules that we've been using this whole time for this problem, you should get the same thing. Since we have a negative plus a negative, the answer you're going to get is always negative. And when they have the same sign like this, you just add them together and you get 12. So you get negative 12 either way. Two different ways of thinking about the exact same problem. So let me show you a case that we haven't gotten to yet though, because the problems I've given you deliberately haven't gotten you into this territory. What if you have 8 minus negative 4? This is a problem we have not done up till now. I've given you problems where you're subtracting positive numbers or when you're adding negative numbers like this, but I've never given you a problem where you're subtracting a negative number. I haven't given you that problem. And so here's how you handle it. Basically, anytime you see subtraction of a negative number, what you do is you kind of, on your paper, you write it as 8 plus 4. In other words, when you have a negative and a negative sitting right next to each other, you can kind of put a plus and a plus here, and that's called adding the opposite. So 8 minus a negative 4 is really the same thing as 8 plus 4. And what is 8 plus 4? 8 plus 4 is 12. Positive 12, of course. And that's the answer. So make sure you understand that. You might hear your teacher say, or you might see your book say, add the opposite, add the opposite, add the opposite. What does add the opposite mean? It only pops up when you're subtracting a negative number. When you have these two negative signs, this double negative here, sitting right next to each other, they're kind of sort of cancel each other out, and so you can basically make them both positive, and it changes it back into addition, so it makes it easier. And an easy way for you to remember this is, like I said, two negatives sitting next together. It's kind of like a double negative. You have the same thing in English. If you say something, you might say, I don't want to go to school. What does that mean? It means you don't want to go, right? You might say, you know, I never want to go to school. I never want to go to school. Well, that means you don't want to go, basically, right? But what if you write a sentence that isn't quite right? Is the following. I don't never want to go to school. I don't never want to go to school. What does that mean? Well, that's not good English. You shouldn't write a sentence like that. That's called a double negative, right? And we're taught not to write sentences like that. Why? Because when you say, I don't never want to go to school, the don't and the never kind of cancel each other out. So when you don't never want to go, it kind of means you do want to go, right? They kind of annihilate each other. I don't never want to go fishing. I don't never want to get a lollipop. It means I really do want a lollipop because I don't never want to get it. So I kind of cancel it out. So anytime I have, just like don't never, anytime you have two negatives sitting next to each other like this, it makes it positive. It changes the meaning of what you're doing, basically, like this. So make sure you understand that. And that happens, you know, for all problems like this. If you have 2 minus a negative 1, then the way you do this is you basically say, I change this from a negative to a positive, I add the opposite. 2 minus a negative 1 is basically going to be 2 plus 1, which is 3, right? 10 minus a negative 3, right? Anytime I have those two negative signs sitting next to each other, I can add the opposite, and that's going to be 10 plus 3 is 13. So anytime I have a negative sitting next to another negative, I can add the opposite, I can change it back into addition and go into there. And now that you've kind of seen this one case where you're subtracting a negative number, you've seen everything there is to know about adding and subtracting negative numbers. Okay? What if you have, just to kind of go back to something that we've touched on earlier, what if you have negative 12 minus 5, right? Negative 12 minus 5. Well, you start at negative 12, you go 5 units to the left, then it's negative 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. It's going to be negative 17. This is exactly the same thing as negative 12 plus negative 5. Exactly the same thing. You're adding two items that are the same, so you get a negative sign, and you add the numbers together, 17, like this. So anytime you see plus next to a minus, you can just treat it as subtraction. Anytime you see minus next to a minus, you can treat it as addition. Basically, you kind of cancel them out like that. Okay? And it's the same thing that we've learned, you know, like in 3rd grade math. You know, if you have 3 minus 2, the answer that you're going to get is 1. It's exactly the same thing as 3 plus a negative 2. Basically, I have 3 pencils. I owe somebody 2 pencils. So when I add them together, what am I going to be left with? Only 1 pencil. Once I pay back the 2 people that I owe, I'm only going to have 1 thing left. And if I have something like 0, you know, ice cream cones, and I subtract a negative 5 ice cream cones, then basically because I have nothing and then I subtract a negative number, it's the same thing as adding the opposite. So what I have is 0 plus 5 is 5 ice cream cones. So if I start with nothing but I subtract a negative number of ice creams, those two things kind of cancel and I actually end up with 5 ice cream cones in the end. Now, doing more of this subtraction business, dealing with fractions, you might see something like 5/3 minus 7/6. It's subtraction. The only difference is that you have some fractions here. Now, we've talked about fractions before. We can't do the subtraction right away because we do not have common denominators. So let's take a few minutes to make these denominators the same. So we'll have 5/3 minus 7/6. Okay, so I see a 3 on the bottom and a 6 on the bottom. The easiest way to make these guys common is to multiply that by 2 and multiply the top by 2, because then that'll give me 6 on the bottom. So what I'll have is 10 over 6 minus 7 over 6. And then when I have 10 minus, the way I can subtract these fractions, since these are the same denominator, the denominator will stay the same, and then 10 minus 7 is going to give me 3/6. And you always check to see if this is a reduced fraction. We've talked about fractions in the previous section. I can divide the top by 3, and I can divide the bottom by 3. And when I do that, 3 divided by 3 on the top is 1. 6 divided by 3 on the bottom is 2. So it's 1/2. So what we had to do is combine a few different concepts. We wanted to subtract these numbers. We had to get the common denominator in order to do it, and we just do the subtraction as we normally do, and then we go ahead and simplify the fraction by dividing top and bottom by 2. Let me close, or I should say divide the top and the bottom of this fraction by 3. Let me go ahead and close this section off by doing a kind of a larger problem that will involve subtracting. Let's say we have 3 minus, and then we have a bracket, negative 4 minus 3, like this. All right? So what do we do here? Well, we have a bracket, right? So we need to do what's inside of that first before we can do anything else. So here we have negative 4 minus 3. Negative 4 minus 3. So what we know we're going to have is a negative answer because we're starting with negative 4. We're going more to the left. We're going to go 3 units to the left, so it'll be negative 5, negative 6, negative 7. Negative 7 like this. Another way to remember it is, subtraction can be written as plus a negative. So this is really negative 4 plus a negative 3. So we're basically adding 2 negative numbers here. The answer will be negative 4 plus 3 is going to give us 7. All right? And then what we'll have, since we know this is now negative 7, we'll have a 3 minus, and on the inside we'll have a negative 7. And since we just learned that anytime you have a negative sitting next to another negative like this, you can add the opposite. So what you're going to have is 3 plus 7, which is just simply 10. And that is the answer. That's the final answer. So there's a lot of things you had to do in this problem. We wanted to do the inside first. We know we have negative 4 minus 3, so we had to do that subtraction. You can think of it in terms of subtraction, moving left on the number line, or you can think of it in terms of adding a negative 3, which we've done many times. We get that guy here, and then we have to add the opposite to get back and figure out how to deal with these 2 negative signs together, and then we can go ahead and end up with the final answer. All right, let's just do a couple more here, and we'll call it a day. Let's say we have 5 minus 3 plus 3 minus 5. All right? So the first one here, we have to do what's inside the parentheses first. The first one here is really easy because 5 minus 3 is what we've done from first grade. That's just 2. Okay? The second one is 3 minus 5. That can give students some problems at first, but then you realize that when you have subtraction like this, it's really the same as 3 plus a negative 5. 3 plus a negative 5. That means we're basically adding numbers together with different signs. So we ignore the sign for a second, and we subtract. 5 minus 3 is 2. The sign that we get is going to be the sign of the bigger number. In this case, we have a negative 5 here and positive 3. So we just take the sign of the larger number. This can be written, in other words, as 3 plus a negative 5. We've been doing those all together, for the whole time. So if it's easier for you to think of it that way, do so. You get negative 2. If you can think of a number line and think of you being over here at positive 3 and you go 5 units to the left, that would be 2, 1, 0, negative 1, negative 2. That's going to be your answer. Either way you want to think about it is fine. So what we have here is 2 plus negative 2, which, since we've learned now, plus a negative is just simply subtraction. 2 minus 2 is what? 0. So the answer is 0. Same as 2 minus 2. All right, final problem. 5 minus, open a bracket, 4 plus negative 2, close bracket, minus 5, close the outer bracket. That's what we want to simplify. So what do? Well, we have a giant bracket here, so we know we need to do what's inside of here first. We have a lot of addition and subtraction. So according to order of operations, we go left to right inside of the bracket first. So the first thing we work on is these first guys here and try to just do that. 4 plus a negative 2, which is, by the way, the same thing as 4 minus 2. So you know from thinking of it that way, the answer is just going to be 2. But if you didn't remember that plus minus is basically going to give you 4 minus 2, if you didn't remember that, then you could say, okay, I'm adding together 2 things that are different signs. So I ignore the signs and subtract. 4 minus 2 is 2. The sign of the answer is the sign of the larger number. That's why it's positive. So what we're going to actually have is 5 from out here minus, open a bracket. This is 2, and I have 2 minus 5 like this. So now I need to do what's inside this bracket, 2 minus 5. And you can do it any way you'd like. But the way I like to think about it is, just to kind of give you a little bit of variety, 2 minus 5. If I'm on the number line over here at positive 2 and I go 5 units to the left, where am I going to land? I'm going to go 5 units. So starting at 2, it's going to be 1, 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. So the answer is going to be negative 3. I just count 5 units to the left. If that confuses you, no problem. Subtraction is always adding a negative number. So what this really is, another way of saying this, right here, is 2 plus negative 5. So since I'm adding two numbers with different signs, I ignore the signs and I do the subtraction. 5 minus 2 is 3. The sign is going to take the sign of the larger number, which is negative. So either way you want to think about subtraction, if you want to change it back to addition, if you're more comfortable with that, great. If you're more comfortable thinking in terms of moving to the left in the number line, that's fine too. So finally, I'm going to have 5 minus, and inside of this bracket, a negative 3. Now we invoke what we just learned a minute ago. We have subtracting a negative number, which is the same thing as adding the opposite. So what we have is 5 plus 3. Finally, 5 plus 3 is 8. And the final answer is 8. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you add and subtract real numbers in algebra. I cannot stress enough how important it is that you master this. Not just so-so, not just okay, but you have to know it. And the only way you're going to know it is to practice. So if you've just watched this video through and haven't actually picked your pencil up, then that's wonderful. Hopefully you've understood anything. Hopefully you've understood lots of stuff. Go back to the beginning of this section, watch it again. Pause the video every time you see a problem go up and work it out yourself. It doesn't matter if you've seen these problems before. That's fine. Watch it again. Make sure you can get every one of these answers as you go through it, and continue watching the video. You know, if you're not getting all the answers correct, continue watching it and practicing. A lot of people still need practice even after watching this video, so go get my companion worksheets. Make sure you can do all of those problems. Or you can go back to the pre-algebra tutor and practice even more with adding and subtracting negative and positive numbers. But no matter what you do, you really have to get it right, because later on, see, now we're dealing with numbers. These are things you can kind of visualize. Later on, we'll be adding and subtracting variables with letters. It's going to be a little harder for you to kind of know intuitively what to do. So you need to get a good grounding here. Make sure you understand how to do this material, and then follow me on to the next section where we'll learn how to multiply and divide negative and positive numbers.